landscape photography world, the podcast for everyone passionate about landscape photography. I'm Grant Swinburne and I'll be your host on this show, talking to landscape photographers about their motivations, their reasons behind their creative decision making, and what photography means to them. Marcus Bell discusses his move from corporate life to international acclaim as a photographer. After experiencing personal loss, Marcus reconnected with photography through his late father's camera, a turning point that sparked a deep passion for storytelling through his lens. From capturing wedding day emotions to crafting contemplative landscape images, Marcus shares how his work reflects a broader quest for connection to nature, to memory, and to the human spirit. With more than 25 years in the field and accolades such as the AIPP Grand Master of Photography and recognition by American Photo as one of the world's top 10 photographers, Marcus brings both technical mastery and soul to his art. He draws inspiration from iconic photographers like Cartier-Bresson and Salgado and the influence of classic painters such as Vermeer and Rembrandt, which has shaped his approach to light and form. In this conversation, Marcus discusses balancing personal artistic expression with professional work, the use of vintage lenses for mood and imperfection, and how vulnerability in art helps others feel seen. He reflects on the role of planning and intuition in crafting meaningful images, and how photography has become a lens through which he processes and appreciates life's complexities. I hope you enjoy the show. G'day, Marcus. Welcome to Landscape Photography World. Nice to have you on the show. Thanks for joining me.
I'm excited to be here. I've been listening to your podcast and some fascinating people, and so it's going to be great to have a conversation with you.
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to it too. So let's get into it. Why is Marcus Bell a photographer? And in particular, why do you do landscapes? I know landscapes isn't all you do, and we'll talk about that obviously, but obviously landscape photography world, that's what we're here to talk about. But I'm really interested in why people start photography and why they get into it in the first place and what it means to them in their life.
Yeah, photography means so much to me. I stumbled a little bit when I was younger. And that was because there was a few unfortunate things happened. And for me, it ended up being a way of reconnecting with my dad. So when I was 16, he had cancer and after 18 months passed away. And the adverse part of that too is that I was kicked out of home and had to find a job. And then I think I just ended up getting a white collar job and working for an insurance company, and then worked for a bank and ended up just staying there for, I think, 8 years. Through that time, I just wasn't very happy and I felt like I really needed an outlet. And it just happened that my dad was a photographer at some point in his life, and he left me his old camera. It was like a Yashica, and I did use it like when I was a kid occasionally. And so when I started to pick it up, like I just fell in love with it. And I just looked for some guidance and found a place called Image Gallery. And there was a photographer, Doug Spout, and I did a part-time course with him. And I just connected with it and just fell in love. And it's like I found my calling. And I guess there was like multiple reasons, is that I was so dissatisfied with everything else in my life. And I just needed an outlet. And then in that process, it was a realization that I was reconnecting with my dad and the camera that he left me.
Yeah, interesting. I'm interested in that part about, and it's come up a number of times on the podcast, but having it as an outlet and as a method of healing, grieving, call it what you will, in terms of improving your own mental state through that creativity. Is that something that sort of resonates very much with you now, looking back at that time in your life?
Yeah, it was, because it probably, as things moved along and I became a professional photographer, I chose weddings of all things because it was what embodied family, and I think people's emotions and the connections with each other. And I think that was the biggest thing. And that was probably the biggest gift. I think because you do go through all this loss and But then, funny enough, like I ended up getting so much more from going through all of this processing. And he ended up giving me like the inspiration and I guess the tools to be able to really see moments that a lot of people couldn't see. And I really connected with those. And so when I saw like a dad hugging his son on a wedding day, there was this like power in me that I just wanted to connect that for those people so they could see how important that moment was. And even though I couldn't experience that moment myself and that I would never get to do that, is that I didn't want other people not to experience it. And so my photography like really ended up lending itself to recording people's finest moments and happiest moments in their life. And so, yeah, so it ended up being like a lot to unpack in that world and how I progressed to that point. Happy to chat about that too.
Yeah, sure. I think it's important that we do talk about some of that because a lot of people do struggle with, grief or other mental health issues in their life, and finding that creative outlet can be such a powerful way of improving your outlook on life. Makes you think about things, I think, in a very different way, and it makes you look at the world in a very different way. And I've spoken to many people about how their view of the world has changed through photography. How has your view of the world changed from where you started to where you are now? What, a career of nearly 40 years. In that time, things obviously have changed both in your work, but also, I would hope, in your outlook. How have things changed in the way that you view the world?
I think what I realized is that the moments that shape us personally, all the good and the bad, like I've been so blessed to have fallen in love and somehow my wife has stuck through me and like still with me and having three boys. There are so many joyous moments that that really teach me so many different things. And obviously there's been deaths and other even world events. I guess what I realize is that all of those things affect us in some ways and make us really unique. And I think that's what I realized early on is that if we take that into our photography, we will see differently to everyone else. And I think that ends up being a beautiful thing. I think sometimes you can go, and be inspired by other photographers, but I think the greatest tool is our own selves that we can bring to the table. And it's like I was listening to Christian Fletcher's podcast and they had the ND4 guys all together and that they all took a different image, even though they were standing side by side.
Yeah.
And I think that's been true. I've seen that so many times throughout my career and my life as a photographer.
Yeah, it always blows me away when you're standing there with half a dozen other people and you're all looking at the same scene, but everyone's photo, even if some of the compositional elements are similar, they're all different. And I think what you said there about people's viewpoints being very different and each one bringing their own emotional connection to the images they're creating has a part to play in that expression of how people are feeling about both their own work, but also the world that they're viewing and the way that they view the world.
Yeah, very true.
I'm interested in how you went from wedding photographer, and I'm not trying to put boxes around everything that you've done in your career because I know it's varied, but professionally we're a wedding photographer. Where did landscapes come into your work and where did the artistic side of landscapes actually start for you?
Funny enough, I actually started out with landscapes and it was really funny because I think Doug Spout, he's just a genius of a photographer and he just threw a lot of information at me, like in a lot of photographers and a lot of different styles. And one of the things that I gravitated to was the Magnum photographers like Cartier-Bresson and Elliot Erwitt and that really documentary nature style. And then it was about landscapes. And at the same time, Peter Eastway was producing a book called Better Photography, and which I think he still does. And so this is going back into the early 90s. And so he showed me this two things. Doug taught me how to darkroom print, but he just taught me how to really feel an image. And so it was never really about being technical in the darkroom. It was really about communicating how you felt. And so there was a lot of dodging and burning. And so it was funny enough, I was taught how to custom print from the word go.
Nice.
And I didn't realize how special that was and how that would shape the rest of what I do. And at the same time, Peter was talking about a book by Eddie Eframs, and it was the most amazing, incredible book where it was these incredible landscapes. And when brought into the darkroom, were just finessed. And again, it just complemented exactly what Doug was talking to me about. And also what I was learning from the Magna photographers. It was about really communicating a story or a narrative. And that was so important to do in that printing process, or it was just another tool. Yeah. And it was so funny because at the time there was also a lot of controversy in the photography world where, that especially from the journalists and photojournalists and all those sort of things about manipulating like images. And it's always been a topic, even back into the old film days. But funny enough is that
Going back to the glass plate days.
Exactly. And then I think what was so funny is that when I started seeing the actual darkroom notes from the Magna photographers and another National Geographic and Life magazine, and then so a lot of these images in some ways you could say were quite heavily manipulated in the darkroom, and where I thought it blew the argument out of the water because I guess even from a photojournalist point of view, it's you choose what to include in and what you choose to leave out also can actually stray the story too. So it's a can of worms, but so it's just interesting to hear that and see that and be inspired from the start. And but that's how I got into that landscape photography. And what happened is that I went to a wedding and like a friend's wedding. I took my camera. And that's when a lot of things started to change. It was everything that I loved about the Magna photographers and documenting the world. I didn't realize, but was right in front of me at a wedding.
Yeah.
It just that weddings weren't ever photographed or very rarely photographed that way. It was generally like a very methodical and processed and with a certain set list and all that. And so when I took the photos and gave them to my friends, they absolutely loved them. And that sparked the idea is that I really enjoyed it. And they said, oh my God, we love your photos more than the professional photographer we paid. So yeah, and then I got into weddings. My true love back then was landscapes, and weddings wasn't really. It was like more of an income, but it was something that I still enjoyed. But that light bulb moment was actually going to a seminar, and it was with Dennis Montebelli and Gay Campbell, and they were so huge rock stars back then, and they were on the covers, shooting the covers of Rolling Stone magazine and all these ones. And it was like the X-Files was huge and had Mulder and Scully, like I'm showing my age, but then they were pictured in bed and these guys took it. And I just was inspired and loved their work. And it was interesting. I listened to them a whole day talking about it. And here I was, I just had this question. I went up and asked them, I said, like, when do you get the time to do the stuff that you really love doing? And they looked at me strangely and said, well, what do you mean? And I said, what you showed me is just so incredible. But when do you get the time to really do the stuff that you love doing? And I think it was because like here I was thinking, I was hardly getting the time to do landscapes. And I was getting taken away with weddings and things like that. And he just looked at me and said, you know what? We love everything we do, like of what we shoot, and we just happen to get paid extremely well to do it. And for me, that was like a light bulb moment that I went away and gone, oh my God, first of all, could you do something that you got paid to do but it was like not working? And then, so anyway, I went away and I really took it to heart. And I realized at that point, if I was going to stay and do weddings, I've got to really love it and not just, you've got to somehow really connect with it. Or I've just got to leave weddings and just do landscapes and find a way I could earn. But in the end, I chose weddings, and again, was because of that connection with my dad and feeling that I could bring something to the table. So that's how I started as a landscape photographer and ended up photographing weddings.
Fair enough. I'm fascinated by that. And I think looking at some of your wedding work, the way that you've injected landscapes and that sense of place for the occasion into a lot of your work has both been a signature mark of your wedding photography, but it also, I think, changed the way that a lot of people started to look at their own weddings. And it's now very fashionable, of course, to have your destination wedding, because it is all about the place. It is all about the pictures that you can get, whether it's Fiji, Hayman Island, or the Snowy Mountains. You want to be in a special place that might hold a special place in your heart with your chosen partner, but you want your photos to reflect that love of the place as much as the love of the person that's in the photo with you.
Yeah, so true. And so that's what happened was I was very lucky and fortunate that I had that love of documentary as well as that understanding of the landscape. And so I didn't think anything of it, of taking a couple out into a landscape or making them really small and capturing their surroundings, because I also thought that was telling the story of their wedding day, about the venue and where they're at or where they live and or what they really love. And so I just went about doing it. And funny enough, I was entering some awards and doing really well. And I think it wasn't very long before I won Australian Wedding Photographer of the Year. But I had all these photographers telling me, you can't do this. Yeah, you can't photograph weddings like this. This is not the way it's done.
And well, it's a formula, isn't there?
Yeah, that's right. It was a formula. And there was a few photographers that were breaking that formula. And one was like David Oliver in Sydney, a couple others in Melbourne and another. But they were the absolute minority. If you had 2,000 photographers, there's probably 5 of them doing documentary sort of style. And
particularly the agency sort of guys that have a dozen, 15, 20 photographers on their books. And they're just booking, all they're doing is taking the bookings and booking this person and saying, all right, you go out, you do this wedding, here's the formula, off you go.
That's right. And then I think, because I never got joined.
Because I hired one.
And I think it's because I never got into the fashion side of things. It just wasn't my thing. But then that's when I realized there's wedding photographers that were very fashiony and so that came into the scene, and it was a complete opposite of doing something. And they ended up creating a great pathway for themselves and going great guns. But it was then a big divide between what we were doing or what I was doing and the other sort of fashion photographers. But I guess what was happening, when we didn't realize at the time, Australia was changing the world in the way of how wedding photography would end up being photographed. And so it was actually people like myself that were doing the landscape side and the documentary style. And then there was other photographers doing this high fashion work. And together, it was incredible, the influence we ended up having on the world. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah. I mentioned the agency person that did our shots. I'm sorry, I can't remember her name, but she ended up staying for the reception after she'd finished her work.
Yeah.
And she just stayed because we were having a party and she was enjoying herself.
That's all right. That's all right.
I'm not complaining. And it was a pretty good deal that we got. And I love the photos.
No, that's so good. That's so good.
Formulaic or no, I loved what we got.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah. I was going to say, it was funny because early on, I got to say, landscape photography is a real challenge. It's not easy. And I guess no photography is, to become really good at it.
Yep.
And I studied and I read so many books on composition and understanding, and I really did struggle with it. But one of the things that was huge for me with the weddings is that I've always sometimes learned that it was so important to have a center of interest and to guide people to that center of interest. And the great thing about doing weddingscapes, putting the couple in these big landscapes, is that was your center of interest if you got it right. So for me, it was fantastic. You know what I mean? It was just it was so easy because I finally had that center of interest that I could guide people to and really create a story.
Yeah, fantastic. What was the first landscape, though, that grabbed your heart and said, this is what I want to do?
I would have to say it would have been a seascape down on the Gold Coast early on, because Doug would give me these challenges and the other students, and where you would get 1 roll of film, it was just 36 exposures, and you had 6 subjects, and for each subject you got 6 shots.
Yeah.
And you had to challenge yourself. And it was brilliant way of thinking, because sometimes you might nail it the first shot.
Mm-hmm.
Other times it might be the last shot, or it could have been any, like number 2 or 3, but
Sure.
it really challenged you to think. So I still actually take that idea today when I'm out there and thinking about working the subject or working the actual landscape or in the framing, and to make a difference. But yeah, it would have been definitely early on. And it was like, I think that's what gravitated me to landscape photography to start with.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I'm really appreciate you sending me that little portfolio of landscapes that you've done. It made it much easier than trawling through websites to try and find which ones are the landscape. But one of the things that came out of that for me was the series that you've been able to collect as bodies of work from either a particular place or a particular subject. That sort of shows to me that projects are obviously a big part of the way that you work. How do you think about your projects in the planning phase and leading up into the execution side of things?
I always think about, before going to a place, of what the opportunities might present themselves. So for me, I've been really lucky, even sometimes through weddings, to be able to travel around the world and get to these incredible places. And so I do a lot of research, and I think about what's there and what's the opportunities. And I sometimes relate that to back here, because sometimes in a project, I want to actually show the juxtaposition of how we might, like someone else might live overseas, or how the landscape might differ. For me, one of the biggest things that I love would be the mountains. I remember back in 1998 being in the Swiss Alps and just being at the top. And the funny thing is, I'm actually scared of heights, but it's hilarious. But here I am, like, I think it was like 3,000 meters or 4,000 meters up high. And
yeah, wow.
And just saying to myself, man, in your lifetime, you need to come back to places like this as many times as you can, because it was just, I don't know, it was in a way very spiritually and grounding and in awe of the beauty. So whenever I do get to travel, I try to actually make sure that I can even find some mountains. So if I've got to look at and go catch another flight, I'll make my way there.
There definitely is something about those sharp, pointy shapes and the steep slopes and a cliff edge and those sorts of things. I think they just do inspire feelings of awe and feelings of the wonder of nature, if nothing else, when you look at them. I know if I go on a drive and we're going through mountains, my head's on a swivel. I should be driving sometimes if I'm the driver. But yeah, I'm looking around going, oh, that's a shot. Yeah. That looks like a shot.
I think as a photographer, is like the thing that I always remind myself and learn is that it's so easy to not go out and photograph. And it's so easy to come up with an excuse and not get up early or something like that. And one of the things, and there's times where I've got no idea what I'm going to photograph or what I'm going to do. But what I find is once I start putting one step in front of the other, something always happens. And then that turns into something else. And then all of a sudden a project develops before then I realized. And then you get really excited. Then like the cogs start turning and that passion just takes over, which is the prettiest cool thing about photography.
Nice. We talked a little bit before we started about one of your projects there. The death of roadscapes is probably the only word that comes to my mind. Where did that come about, and how do you go about wandering about in sort of arid places looking for road signs?
Interestingly, I just had this idea that I had about 3 or 4 days, like in the Middle East, like that I took because a friend said, it's such a really great experience. So rather than flying back straight away from a job, I thought I'm going to go in, and then not knowing anyone there, I just came across a photography walk chat group, and I put on there that I'm flying in. I've got this idea. I want to go out into the desert and capture some images. Would anyone love to go out for a day?
Nice.
And so funny enough, I didn't get any answers. No, but except just last minute, I got this one answer. Said, yeah, I would love to do it. And it was interesting. Like I caught up with this guy, picked me up from my hotel.
Yeah.
And within 5 or 10 minutes, he was just sizing me up, making sure that I wasn't some serial killer. And then he was having the joke. He goes, like, we're taking a big gamble. We don't know each other. We don't know.
And you're driving out into the desert.
Yeah, we're driving out into the desert. Anyway, and he wanted to take me to this spot that he loved. And he was a wildlife photographer. And I said, okay. But on the way, I just wanted to get some shots of the desert. Because so the funny thing was, like, he took me to an oasis where it was all green and agriculture and everything like that, the complete opposite to where I want. Anyway, I was really patient and he was a really nice guy. And he was actually a really great landscape. And what I loved is that he showed me so many things that day that I would have missed. He showed me these lizards and these animals that were there, but if you didn't have a good eye, you would have totally missed it.
Yeah.
So he showed me something that, it was incredible. Anyway, he was really patient, and I think, like I said, I'll just be 10 minutes. Like we pulled on the side of the road, and then I think probably an hour later that I'd finished. But he was in awe because I don't know, in awe is the word. He was really confused because he didn't know what I was photographing.
Yeah.
He goes, why are you photographing this? And then I said, I'll show you. And then he goes, wow, here I am, and I can't see that at all. And I explained to him, I said, you know what? You just showed me exactly the same thing. Anyway, and we stay in touch. And anyway, and that's how that happened, is that I just had this idea. I reached out. It was just a great experience.
Fantastic. Yeah. And to be honest, fantastic images. I think the minimalism and the simplicity of them is really what makes them. And the striking colour differences between the black strips of road and the road signs and the golden sands of the desert and the various ripples of whatever in the sand in some of them. I just love them. And again, I'm kind of like him. I would have driven past that or walked past all of that and not seen it and not gone, oh, there's it gone.
Yeah, that's so true. So true. And I guess too, for me, like what I loved, again, it was like, so I do spend a lot of time learning still. I'm far from knowing anything really. And with composition, man, it's a rabbit warren. When you start learning about dynamic symmetry and Fibonacci and pi and even the flower of life and all of these other things, like they go way beyond all the other S curves and things like that. And then being out in a place like that and being able to have the elements to start thinking about where you might line certain elements up. And so how then you might line, and then you have to think about the angle of. So it's really great. From a creative process, it's pretty incredible.
And like you said earlier, and certainly a lesson that stuck with me since my photography school days, what you leave out is just as important as what you include.
So true. So true. And I studied painting a lot ever since the start. And whenever I was introduced to understanding about the camera obscura and how painters use those tools to be able to line things up and create a really great template of what they would sketch out and then paint it. And then it was a realization as a painter is they get to choose what they get to leave out. Often for me, this is the case. I don't know, not everyone's like this, but where I find I struggle if I see something that's there that shouldn't be there, even though I know technically I could probably edit that out, I struggle to still take the picture. I find it a blocker. And it's funny. And then, so sometimes I have to force myself and say, Marcus, just take the goddamn shot, because like you can use tools to get it out, but
you can remove that. Yeah.
Exactly. I know. But for some reason, I guess it's my training and
easier than ever.
Exactly. So yeah, so it is funny.
Yeah. I'm interested in the role that personal expression plays in people's landscape photographies. And I guess I'm interested in how you infuse your own style into your images. You've got, I think, quite a varied set of images in your landscapes, and they range from those more banal roadscapes to some fascinating intimate portraits of trees or mountains and broad vistas and so forth. But they do, I think, have a common feeling. And I'm really interested in how you look at your work now, looking back and seeing how that thread has wound its way through all of your images.
Yeah, it's a good question because, again, it really comes back to feeling and seeing the beauty in things. And that's what I realized. I guess it is where, like, the way I'm seeing the world at that time and the way I'm feeling about myself or own relationships and or challenges and things like that. And one of the things that, like, I do connect with a lot is the water. There is times when, in business and on the photography side of the business is that it can get really stressful. And I know that I just need to wash that away. And as soon as I go into the water, I feel like it just evaporates and it's a real, and I think the other time I get that feeling is with the camera, is that I'm able to express how I'm feeling. And sometimes it's a little bit more tension. But other times there is a softness. And so that's when I might use a little bit more of a slower shutter speed to be able to bring that movement into the trees, because sometimes when it just looks too rigid and stilted, but when you bring that movement in, it's something different. And so I think it is that idea that I'm bringing into the landscape. I want to communicate that to other people to experience and share. And some people will connect with it and other people won't. And I think that's what I learned with a lot of the other photography that I do. Some people really connect with it and other people don't. And then they'll choose another photographer. And I think that's exactly the same thing with landscapes.
Yeah.
So,
and I think everyone's got to learn to be okay with that as well. There will be some people that are just downright don't like it, and we'll be more than happy to tell you that.
Yeah, that's right. That's so true.
They tend to be louder than the ones that, I don't know whether they're louder or that they hurt more and therefore you take more notice of it. I'm not sure. But the ones that say, yeah, that's lovely, I really love it, that kind of washes over you a little bit, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I think the funny thing though with that is that, like, it is a reality, and as creatives, you don't really take it on the chin. You often take it to heart. And that's the only thing. 40 years later, I'm still learning that.
Yeah, it's a hard lesson to learn, but I think one of the key things is having someone that you trust give you honest feedback.
Yes.
And getting that kind of relationship where you can take that honest feedback, and that feedback is saying, yeah, here's an image, here's what I like about it, here's what I don't like about it, here's where I would do things differently. And it's not necessarily you have to follow those instructions, but it's giving you the experience from that other friend of yours to say, hey, it's okay, but it's not as good as it could be.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true.
Is there anyone in your sphere that you go to for that sort of feedback?
I do have a few people that I do. I think they do take it easy on me, and they're probably not as hard as that they should be, which I probably need to find a few extra people to be able to get that feedback from. I think so.
I usually use my wife sometimes because I know I'll get honest feedback. She'll don't like that one.
Yeah. So true. I agree. Yeah. Like often, my boys are good at that as well. So.
Yeah. What does success in your photography look like?
Oh, for me, it's an interesting one because I've been really blessed to, after that first lot of years working in a bank, is that I've got to live the dream. Like I absolutely love what I do, and that I've had a really successful business as well doing photography. It's always been a balance for me. I try not to go down the business side too much because I find then you lose your photography. And so then I steer back the other way. So I would say the defining success for me is getting commissioned by someone that believes in your abilities and are willing to trust you with important things in their life. So either be it a wedding or a family portrait, or really hang something on their wall, people as a landscape or a piece of artwork from you, because generally that wall space is very limited, and for them to take a gamble. I remember one client that bought the Pantanal horses print back in, I think it was 2012. They really wanted to have me as their wedding photographer, and they wanted to fly me to Lake Como to do it where I'd been a few times before photographing weddings, and I loved it. It's one of the most incredible places. But then I was booked, unfortunately, so I couldn't do it. They were gutted. But on their 10-year wedding anniversary, so that was in 22, a few years ago, they contacted me and they said, Marcus, we want to buy one of your prints. We weren't able to have you at our wedding, but they stayed in touch through socials, things like that. And I think so that was pretty special, that even though I couldn't be part of their lives and their wedding, 10 years later, they wanted to have one of my personal works hanging in their house. Yeah, so that's where it gets really special.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, so cool.
You mentioned talking about doing, I hate to call them experiments, different techniques and stretching yourself. How important do you feel that has been in developing techniques for you, for your own personal work in particular, but also in your professional side of things? You've got to look at things, I guess, quite differently when you're starting to experiment. You've got to accept the failures are going to fail and learn from them. How do you manage that process? And I'm just interested in how you experiment with your style or with your technique.
Funny enough, I think like I've definitely got a guardian angel that's always looked out for me and introduced me to the most incredible people, starting from Doug Spout and Peter Eastway. And then when I started winning all these awards and getting to speak overseas in various places, I would become friends with some of the greatest photographers. And a couple were photojournalists, Greg Gibson from Associated Press and Cliff Mountner from the Philadelphia Inquirer. And it was interesting listening to them talk, where when they go out on assignment is that they've got to get the shot. So they looked at it and said, we've got to get a safety shot. Yeah. But then once they've got the safety shot, it's like gloves are off. They can then experiment, play and things like that. And so that's always stuck with me, is that they are right. There is, when you've got a job to do and you're getting paid well to do it, you got to deliver those tours. But at the same time, those clients are also paying you to be very creative and extraordinary too. And so what I've learned is that there is a time to get that safety shot and then play and do something really incredible. And then that also means in the darkroom or the digital darkroom, where you just accidentally make mistakes. And especially with sliders, I spent way too much time because I just love the actual physical wet darkroom and what you could do in there. When I was really lucky, digital was just starting to come in. And so I immersed myself in that world straight away. And then I would just spend sometimes days just creating different looks. And the greatest thing with the sliders is that you do the complete opposite with all the sliders, and you make a mistake or you invert an image or invert what you are doing as an action and made an error, and you go, oh my goodness, how cool is that?
It looks pretty good.
Yeah. So then you would
done that. Well, I kicked my tripod and it came out okay.
That's right. That's so true. All of those things, like I would say my biggest mistakes have been my biggest wins.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, what you were saying about getting the safety shot and then being able to move on and be very creative and change the way that you look at what it is that you're doing and being able to experiment and play around. And I think that's exactly the right word, is playing around and make mistakes, let them happen and work out whether or not they're any good.
Yeah, it's true. So true.
One of the other things that I know you've done in the past, and I'm really interested in, is you've created your own lenses. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, it goes back to meeting some of the most incredible people around the world. And a great friend now is Parker J. Pfister, and he's so creative and so talented, and he shoots everything from 8:10 large format to digital. And I guess he also knew David Burnett and some of the lenses that David was using at the time that people didn't talk about. And I guess like a lot of and we're talking, this is going back 12 years. So a lot of these things I'm about to talk about is probably a lot more common now because I see them on YouTube and people talking about this as, oh, they've just adapted this lens or and taken a little camera. And I guess one of the earlier ones was that it was a thing like freelancing where Parker would get like a medium format, say from the Mamiya C330 and just hold it in front of the like a 5D. And some of the things he was getting, I thought, wow, this is so cool. Again, one of his friends also that Parker became good friends and I got to know was Craig Strong from Lens Baby. So this is like early days. And it just really sparked my interest because up until this point, like I was taught that everything had to be sharp and everything had to, I don't know, is that everyone was looking for lens perfection and technology perfection. And here was this lo-fi craziness of holding a lens in front of the sensor without even a mount. Anyway, it just sparked so many ideas and Parker would share things with me. And then I would start trying different things. And where Parker was happy to do the freelancing, I wanted it to be a little bit more controlled. Yep. So therefore, I ended up creating my own mounts, some out of truck tires from a remote controlled car, aerodiding the lens in there. And so I would have different accesses and a bit like a tilt shift lens in there. And then working with Craig Strong from Lens Baby, he would send me prototypes and then some of the things that I would give him information back about. I love this and love being able to do that. And then because then as his products progressed, I was able to buy them and then adapt different lenses. Like probably like one of the things that I always wanted to do, and it's like an impossible, if someone can achieve this, like I would love them to share it with me, but I would love to be able to shoot the look of a 4.5 camera digitally.
Yeah.
And I've tried everything from like on medium format digital bodies and with aero ector lenses and everything that I've tried. And I still, even Pentax lenses, 6.7 lenses, which is a great format, but you still can't get that exact look digitally.
I think, the only way of doing it now is using your crop and then you play around with filters and things to make it look a bit like it.
Yeah, that's exactly. And so anyway, and then I started learning about lenses. And so not only was I making lenses and combining lenses together and housing them and things like that, and even things like old Holga camera lenses and doing that. So this is like 12 years ago, maybe even longer, and doing all these sort of things. And I still play with those lenses now. But then what that led to was understanding about vintage lenses and how special they are. And some are very cheap and some are super expensive. And so where sometimes you're getting an image where there's this beautiful softness through the entire image, but the lens, but it's sharp. And and there's a difference between trying to do this in Photoshop than doing it.
Doing it in camera is totally different.
Yeah, because I just used to love Herrell's portraits from like the 1920s or earlier and how they did that. And it was a matter of the lenses, the hot lights and the film that you can't really try to replicate, even though I would try to build an action to do it as close as possible. It's still not the same. But lenses is that, and that's when I got more and more into it. And I know some people go, oh, it's overrated or this and all that. But then
I think it's more because it's become trendy.
Yeah, exactly. And funny enough, because
they do make great lenses and the old cameras are absolutely marvelous.
And there is this like a glow that is true. And there is some other lenses that have it too. And so I've sought them out and all that. So I have an issue and a problem now that I have way too many lenses. But it's interesting because you learn so much, because from a point of view is that there was a stage in my life that I was looking at DxO Mark and this is the latest, the sharpest lens in the world and the greatest. But when I started using those lenses, I realized like there wasn't really a lot of soul or character. It was very clinical and very methodical and it had no feeling. So then I realized I was going down the wrong path, like trying to find sharp lenses. It was actually more the imperfections that I'm looking for.
Yeah. It is interesting. And again, Holger and those sorts of photography trends, the analog trends, which have become trendy nowadays, and using your cheap toy cameras and your box brownies and so forth is really coming back into its own. And I think people have embraced not only, yes, you can get electronic filters for all of that kind of look on your standard camera or on your phone, but there is something about getting hold of that old gear and having to play around with it and seeing what you can do with it.
Yeah, that's so true. And interestingly, so I would actually, going back to that advice that I got from Greg, is that I would take one of these or two of these lenses along to even to the weddings and then shoot a whole bunch. And then the clients just loved it. It just gave a look that no one else was doing at the time. And I wasn't really sharing with it about doing it as well. I was kept a bit quiet, not for any particular reason, but I think it's because I probably owed it to Parker and a few other, like in David Burnett, that were really mavericks in that area. And I was just on the periphery, luckily, as friends that got a bit of an in and then took it somewhere else as well.
So fascinating. I'm interested in how you go about looking for locations now for your landscape work.
It's a tough one because I found that, okay, so I went to this retreat, where I ended up used to photographing a lot of weddings. It's one of the most beautiful properties in all of Australia. And it just happened it was a wedding anniversary. So we decided to go up and stay there. And it was a luxury resort, but only have about 18 guests. And my wife was going for a spa treatment that day. And I thought, we're in the middle of nowhere. What am I going to do? And so I picked up the camera. It was the middle of the day. And I thought, how am I going to take photos in the middle of the day? And I went for a walk. And I actually did have a couple of these lenses with me that I'd made, and also like a beautiful 7.3 millimeter Hector Leica M, not even an M mount, it was like a screw mount. So it was like from the 1939, I think it was. But the swirliness and the paintering effect that you get from this lens is just outstanding. And so I just ended up shooting, and it was like this, like being struck by lightning, I think. Like, again, it was like this moment I realized, oh my God, this would be the perfect place to run a workshop, and look for the ordinary or the extraordinary in the ordinary.
Yep.
Because effectively that's what I was seeing through using these old lenses and all that. But it was one of the most beautiful places to do stargazing and astrophotography at night. And you're up on this plateau, and so the landscapes are just generally just incredible. So anyway, the general manager, before I left, he goes, "Oh, Marcus, I've got an idea. I want to talk to you." And I said, "Oh, I've got an idea. I want to talk to you." And it just happened. It was exactly the same idea. I said, "I would love to run a workshop up here." And he goes, "Oh, we would like you to run a workshop and do all your landscapes and just share your photography." And so that was about 6 years ago. And then we do that annually now. And so, it's pretty cool, like venue. And so finding those places sometimes can be when you least expect it. I think landscapes in the right light and the right conditions, things that you might have looked over, but then all of a sudden I love fog and I love clouds and that atmospheric side of things, and it just changes everything, or storms. And one of the things that I learned is it's fabulous actually to shoot black and white at all times of the day, especially places like the UK, and their landscapes just come to alive. You don't have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, even though there's still shots to be had. But
if you're in Scotland in summer, you're getting up at 3 in the morning.
Well, that's true. That's true. Yeah, that's so true.
Is there a time you've been in the field where things didn't go quite as planned and something unforgettable still emerged?
Yeah, definitely. I would probably say I was in the Pantano. It was like, with the law of physics or reality, there's no way I should have been there. I was with a National Geographic photographer, Izan, and I was with Greg Gibson, who covered Afghanistan and Iraq wars and stuff like that. And we were on this remote cattle station, and to just get there was just like an adventure in itself. But Izan had this incredible idea of getting these thousands head of cattle charging towards us as the sun was setting. And I don't really ever ridden a horse. And he goes, oh, we'll be on horseback and everything like that. And anyway, like the time came and we ventured off. And so we're going through all of these waterways. And so there's all these caiman and like alligators. And I said, no, don't worry about them. They didn't come active at night. And I said, okay. And then like, we just went probably kilometers like on this ride to get to this location from the homestead, which is always already like in the middle of nowhere. And it was just crazy. And they comes charging in and everything like that. All hell breaks loose. I've got this series of shot Azan coming off his horse. But as he's coming off the horse, like he's still shooting, like everything going on.
That's through national photography.
Exactly. I know. I couldn't believe it. And then all the cattle are running towards me. And then I just hid behind a tree. Like luckily, as they just, it was just incredible. Anyway, and so we didn't get the shot and they wanted to do the shot again. And the sun was already setting. And then here I am, like we've got to go kilometers by horseback, like through these caiman alligator
when they're going to be
waters, when they're going to be. Exactly. And here I'm thinking, oh my God, I think I just nearly died. And then I'm going to definitely die on the way back anyway. So I might as well say a few Hail Marys now. And, but one of the most amazing things happened on the way back. There was the biggest blood red moon rising, full moon. And I just felt like someone was either just looking after us and over our shoulder that night. And we got back all safe. And it was just the most incredible experience afterwards. Like during it, it was a bit like freaking out. Yeah. But again, and I don't think we ended up getting the shot. And I didn't even take a shot of the moon.
Wow.
Like, I think I was probably so traumatized but at the same, in a good way. And, but that whole experience was like one of probably the most incredible experiences of my life.
Sometimes those things are way better than any photo could tell anyway.
Yeah, so true. I think probably the best photo I took, which I never took with a camera, was just with my eye. Like I love surfing and my boys now love surfing. And there was one boy, Jackson, he just didn't really for whatever reason, he was just late to the party. Yeah. But my two other sons, we had this incredible session on the Super Bank down at Snapper and Greenmount. And then anyway, as I was coming in, I was exhausted and the other guy said, oh, Dad, do you mind just taking me out? And I said, oh yeah, all right. And anyway, and just took him out. And then we got drifted around and to out the front of Greenmount, and then this huge rainstorm came in. And then it was the most perfect, surreal. It was all backlit, like sunlit rain, this huge crazy rainbow in front of us, and then these two dolphins just like on the side. And it was the most incredible experience. And I think that from that moment it actually sold him, because he hasn't stopped surfing since. So but it's probably the greatest photo that I never took. So yeah, greatest experience. So it's pretty cool.
What about places that are your favourites? Are there any places close to your heart that you've either got unfinished business with or that you just have to keep going back to because they're so good?
I think anywhere with mountains, like there's it's just this connection to it that I think are just always in awe. It's also challenging to photograph as well. And it's not necessarily that I'm always going to, in my mind, to think about capturing the greatest photo. I think it's actually just having a great experience first. And I think therefore photos end up coming from those experiences. I think where I have been privileged and got to travel around the world, funny enough, people always ask me, where's the best place to go? And I think it's always been actually the best places are always when I've had the greatest companion or people or other photographers around me and experiences that always create the place. There's been plenty of places that I still haven't got to, like Patagonia, which I remember back in late 1990s, with Peter Eastway, he went to Patagonia and I saw that. I was always in awe and I always would want to go there, but I've never been. It just looks so incredible as well. So, yeah.
What happens when you struggle to find inspiration? What do you do? What do you do to regain the spark?
I think the most important thing is just remembering everything that I've always done. And is that, again, it's just putting that first foot and going out and just taking the camera, just starting. I think and then ideas will just come. And again, too, if it all comes a little bit like maybe it is good to just go for a surf, let everything wash away, and then regroup and rethink about everything. I have a love-hate relationship with like things like Instagram and socials, because at the moment, and I don't know if it's just my feed, but I feel like I'm hardly seeing any still images at all.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah, like a lot of it, for some reason, is very video content. The other thing, the images that I have started to see, it feels like sometimes some of the images are just getting to be too perfect. And I think that, because I would see it in the wedding industry, is that people were just always wanting to try to outdo each other. And then along the lines, it's what got forgotten was actually the couple.
Yeah.
And how they were pictured within the image. It was more about, oh, we've gone to this great location and just and then the next person goes, oh, well, I'm going to outdo you, and things like that. And and I think when you take a step back, even with landscape photography, it's far from that. When beauty isn't in perfection, beauty is in imperfections. I think, and like the real magic is, again, like I think what someone brings to the table and shows something different. So I think at the moment, I'm struggling a little bit seeing that at the moment, where maybe I'm just seeing a little bit too much perfection out there.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. What do you see as photography's place in society?
I think it's really important. I think it's fundamental. If you look back through history, there is so many fundamental key moments that was captured through a camera.
Definitely.
That was different to even in motion. So I always see that being the case. I think also there's like a resurgence. I do other series and other bodies of work where I just feel like I take pictures of people that they're all on their phone and then not conversing with each other, or oblivious to the actual world around them. And it's like just an interesting series that I love continuing capturing. But one of the things that you go into, people wanting to take pictures and they're wanting to go back and collect, like young kids. I see it with my boys where they're wanting to go get a compact camera, and they want to use on-camera flash because it's a cool thing.
Yep.
It's a look. But again, it's because it's tactile, and it's a creative process that they're doing. It's the same with listening and people buying records. There's more young people buying records than anyone else at the moment with music and all of those things, I think. And also books, like people are wanting to buy books, and because it's like tactile. And so I think we're probably seeing a little bit of a regression back into people that maybe never experienced touching a book. They're actually picking one up now.
It's interesting you say that. I saw an article, I think it was this morning, might have been yesterday, but it was actually about buying books by the meter for aesthetic reasons. And I think everything behind me, I've read.
Yeah. But that's funny, isn't it? Yeah, it's like like an ornament.
I personally, I don't get that, but and I know people color code. One of my youngest daughter did the arrangement of the books behind me, but that was her aesthetic choices. But there was no command from me to say, other than keep all the authors that are the same author together.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's so good.
Because otherwise I've got to look, there's that, and I've got to go over there to find his other book. Yeah.
And I think like still to today, photography books it's still huge, because I think there's nothing better than just sitting down and being in awe of a really great collection of like images. So so I'm starting to see that more, and I still see value in it, and I'm seeing other people see value in it as well. So I think photography still has a really good place to be. Obviously there's going to be challenges, but you know what, photography has been one big challenge ever since I got into it. And I was lucky when I worked at a bank, is that it went through a merger or got taken over. And I do know at the time that especially older people at the time like really struggled with change.
Yeah.
And then so I really took that on board. And one of the interesting things is that with photography, ever since I've got into photography, there's always been change.
Yep.
Went straight into digital from film, which I was blessed to be able to have a good 5 years shooting film and understanding that. But then even with digital, it's dramatically changed at every step of the way. And now we've got AI, and who knows what's next.
Absolutely. What's the best and or worst advice anyone's ever given you?
I think it's been both. Like, the best advice was like telling me that I couldn't do something. So that was fantastic. I was really lucky to start off my photography career and transition from being in banking and having that regular job. I ended up traveling through Europe for 6 months with my wife, and I just wrote out a business plan in Santorini, of all places. I was so lucky to be there in the last week before we came home, and thought about putting a business plan together, and came up with this crazy idea of, when we get back, I can go into the dark room, I'll just sell prints. But when I got back, and then I also thought like having a market, and I just would sell it at the local market. So it was like in the city. And I thought, yeah, like they probably charge you like $500 for a market store and things like that, not knowing anything. And so when I got back, I found out, oh no, it's $40 to have a market store. But as soon as I turned up to start selling, and all these other photographers, you can't sell prints from overseas here. You only prints from Australia, because it's just all tourists that come through the markets. But it was like the most amazing thing is that like I was selling so many prints to Australians that have gone overseas and didn't get anything, and they just connected with that. And then I started booking commercial jobs and things from that little market store. And so that's how my business started. I just was so passionate. I had a dream and so willing, and just worked my ass off. So I could only print at night because my darkroom had like all like leads and everything in it. But I would just print through the week and then just sell those on the weekend. So I think that was like just hitting it hard. And ever since then, it's always been hard work. But if you find your passion and it doesn't feel like you're working, then that's the biggest joy. And so that was probably the best advice that anyone gave me. It was like, and I think it was just that Montebello and Campbell that just made me realize that I had to love what I do to really succeed. And the rest was history.
Awesome. Awesome. Are there any photographers out there that I need to be talking to?
Yeah. There's so many. I would definitely like talk to Parker J. Pfister. He's like such an incredible, talented photographer. Even if you could talk to David Burnett, he's had such an interesting career. I always admired Michael Kenner's work, and so he would be incredible. And Peter Eastway, if you haven't had him on.
I haven't. I contacted him. It would have been last year now, but I still haven't managed to winkle him out to give me a reply yet.
Yeah. So you have to try him again. And then there's a photographer that I had a great experience with, was Norman McCluskey at the Ring of Kerry in Ireland. And it was a mutual friend that linked us up, and we went out, and he just had this incredible access to places, but he was just such a great photographer, and he has a really good business. So he's a photographer that has a storefront and sells his prints and books, and I just have a great deal of admiration for him. There's some talented photographers like Phil Bassett. Kit Young is a great photographer that works in film. And just mainly shooting black and white, just beautiful work. And then there's Carmen Spitznagel, which is also, she's just very talented. And so there's a few to start with.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. I've got one more question for you, and for many, it's the most important one I ask. Do you like pineapple on pizza?
Oh, I'd have to probably say no. As a kid, I did. But now that with my matured tastes, and also probably the controversy, I stay clear of the old pineapple on the pizza. But I've got to say, I put pineapple in a red duck curry, and you've got me there. Yeah. So that'd be awesome.
Pineapple fried rice.
Yeah. Oh, that's true too. Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you for that. And it's been absolutely wonderful meeting you and getting to know you a little bit better. Where can people find your work, Marcus?
I've got two sites. It's two parts of who I am. And so we've got marcusbell.com that has a lot of my personal works and projects. And then I have studioimpressions.com.au, which is a lot of like my wedding and portraits and commercial work as well. Yeah, they can find me there.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you so much for having me along.
Cheers. Thank you, Marcus. Have you ever tried to experiment with antique lenses or antique gear? Leave a comment below. I'm really interested to hear what you've got to say. Thanks again for listening to Landscape Photography World. I hope you enjoyed the show, and keep listening, because I'll be joined by some great guests in upcoming episodes. You can find my work in this podcast at grantswinburnphotography.com, along with prints and photography gear. I'm also on Vero, Photo, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Don't forget to subscribe, comment, because it really helps to get the podcast to be seen. I'm Grant Swinburne. I hope to see you out shooting soon.